Hello, it's Bruce again. I'm in the process of building a little fine-scale miniatures coaling station. This was released many years ago, and I'm just getting around to building my version now for my slate-run logging railroad in HON3. And as was the case in most of those logging railroads, very few of the structures actually were painted. They were made of wood because it is a logging concern and wood was plentiful. And they knew that for longevity, these railroads were relatively short-lived. They ran out of timber on a particular site after a few years. So no sense putting paint on it. Typically, if the area around the sawmill had any painted structures, it would be the superintendent's house, maybe a church. But pretty much everything else was started out as raw wood and therefore became weathered wood. And that's the look we're looking for here. Aged wood, barn wood, whatever you want to call it. And one of the characteristics of wood when it ages is different types of wood age differently than each other, and even cuts of the same wood off of different trees age a little bit different than one another. So you're looking for a variation in the color. And I think you can see that I've achieved that on the walls here of this coaling station and the floor. I want to talk about how I achieved that. It's kind of a variation on a theme. There are those who will dip their wood in a mixture of alcohol and India ink, and I certainly do that as a basis. And then there's others that will take a marker, Prismacolor marker or another marker, and simply color their wood with the marker and leave it at that. And it gives you a fairly decent but uniform look. I'll show you that right here. So it's a decent look, and you certainly can live with that, and I do it often on interiors of buildings and things that are going to be a little bit further away from the front of the layout. But what I'm going to talk about here over the next few minutes is using a combination of an alcohol and India ink wash and then topping it off with the markers. So let's talk a little bit about the players in the coloration here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process. Up front, I tend to make these videos during the prime winter months when I'm sitting at the modeling bench a lot, and as is often the case, I am once again dealing with a bit of a head cold, so if you hear me sniffing, I apologize up front. All right, let's talk about the bath, the alcohol and India ink bath. The main players on that are India ink, and you can use Higgins in the United States. That's certainly one of the more popular brands. This one is by Artworks. You start out usually with a black India ink, and you're going to mix it with isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. And if you buy a pint size like this, you can just add the ink right to this bottle because the formula works with mixing 2 teaspoons of India ink into a pint of isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. And again, that's fairly standard, certainly not new with me, and you've probably seen other videos on its use. But typically when I'm building, I start by staining all of my strip wood or sheet wood with an alcohol and India ink wash. And to do that, I use those plastic blister pack that you find on big packages of Q-tips, and those are excellent to use. You can put the strip wood in there and then add your India ink and let them soak for a little while. And then I take them out with a pair of tweezers and I set them onto a piece of wax paper to dry, and these I put here last night. And one of the things, the reason I use wax paper is I don't want the regular paper ink to suck all of the India ink out before it dries kind of naturally. But even when you're using wax paper, one side of these pieces of strip wood are going to dry a little bit darker than the other side. And I think you can see that in this case, the side that was down on the wax paper is a lot lighter than the side that had the India ink puddled on top. And that variation, we can use that. Just be careful that you don't pick pieces at random if you're not going to use a marker like I'm going to show you. If you pick pieces at random and, you know, half of them have the darker side up and the other half have the lighter side up, like on a loading dock, when you look at it, it's going to look like a zebra stripe. So you want something other than that in what you're going for. Getting back to the alcohol, you can get this typically in the States in any pharmacy. And it comes in two strengths in the States, 91% and 70%. Now, 91% isopropyl alcohol means 91% of what's in here is the alcohol, the other 9% is water. So if you get to 70%, 30% of what's in that bottle is water, and we are staining some fairly thin strip wood, and water warps wood. So I tend to use the 91% when working with strip wood because it reduces the warping and at the same time increases how rapidly it evaporates and gets dry so you can use the wood. So I tend to use 91%. The other players in the process I'm going to show you are a couple of Prismacolor markers. And these all are in the same color line. And I just typed them up so you can take a look at this a little bit better. But it's Prismacolor Markers. All of them are in the cool gray line, starting with cool gray 20% and going up to cool gray 50%. As you go up in the percentage, the colors are becoming more intense or darker, if you will. But again, it's good to have that variation. When I start with a piece of strip wood, like this one, they look like raw wood right out of the sawmill. And although there's wood grain in it, it's much too fine a grain on basswood for you to ever see it on a model, especially in HO scale, unless you add more grain to it. So if you want, and I don't always use it, but on the outside of this model, this siding on this structure, I did want to show the grain, so I take a fine-tooth razor saw and I draw across the wood, usually twice in each direction, and I'll do it on both sides in this case because you're going to be able to see the inside, and also because then I don't have to worry about picking it up to use it and wondering whether I have the side that has the grain or not. Now you're probably not going to be able to see this on the video, but I can see from 2 feet away that grain pop out of there now. So I do that before I put it into the alcohol wash. Now doing that tends to raise some fuzz. Sometimes you have fuzz right out of the factory anyway on strip wood. And to get rid of the fuzz, just take some 400 grit emery cloth and draw your strip wood through the cloth. Fold it over like you see me doing here and just draw it through in each direction. Sometimes you have to do it 2 or 3 times, but that gets rid of all the fuzz. Now I'll put this wood into my alcohol mix, leave it in for a few minutes, and then take it out and let it dry. Sometimes the alcohol bath will raise a little more fuzz. Just run it through here again. So when you get it out of the alcohol bath and it dries, you have your strip wood in front of you. And again, sometimes one side is darker than the other and so forth. And again, that's not a problem to me. If I'm starting with a darker side, I'll use one of the less intense cool grays when I go to highlight it. And if it's a lighter side, then I will use one of the more intense. I'll go up toward that 50% or 40%. And what this is going to allow you to do is have a lot more control over the coloration on any particular piece of strip wood. These Prismacolor markers one side is got a broad tip and the other one has a pointy tip. And what you want to do is have the broad tip side out. They used to mark them when they had this lighter color. They had one side marked broad and one fine. For some reason they stopped doing that. I guess, just figured this out now. You can see I put a B on here for broad. But that's got a broad band and this has got a narrow band, so that's obviously how they're going about showing you which side to use. So this is very dark. This is a cool gray 50%. So this is the darkest of the grays. And I'll just put it on this raw wood. This was the one I put on before, which was cool gray, I think 30%. This is cool gray 50%. You can see the difference. You can also see, and you can see it better on raw wood like this, if I just wanted to kind of highlight one edge of the wood and not the entire wood, you just tip your broad tip on your marker a little bit and you'll be able to achieve that. And I've done that on many strips of wood here, where if you look close you'll see one side of the strip wood is darker than the other side. But then you're just going to take your strip wood and you're going to run your marker along it. I don't want to use the 50 because this is already pretty dark, so I'll go with looking for the 30 here. That's 40. Yeah, here's the 30. All right. And if you press hard, you're going to get a darker color, and if you press lightly, obviously, it's just going to ride across the top of the wood grain that I put in there. Now, when you first put the marker on, it's going to look darker, but it's going to dry very quickly into a much lighter color. And I'll do this now and get a variety of colors, and I'll do maybe 10 or 15 strips at once, so when I'm modeling I can just look at what I have and what I want to go next. But the difference between using just a straight marker or using just plain straight alcohol is that variation that you are able to achieve on your strip wood, and I think you can see it quite well on the floor here, if nowhere else. So that's it. If you've been using alcohol and India ink, I suggest you get yourself a few Prismacolor markers in this color line. And you don't have to buy all four. They're getting a little pricey. They used to be $3.95. I think the last time I went to a craft store to get them, they were close to $6. But you could get maybe the 30 and the 50 or the 20 and the 40, just so you have some variation. And try using both the India ink and the markers. I think you'll like it. All right, that's it for now.